Have you ever wondered whether the problems in the world today would exist if we had deeper connection to ourselves, others, and the environment, and acted from that place?
Welcome to the Conscious Action Podcast with your hosts Brian Berneman and Kayla Greenville, who believe that connection is the key to taking conscious action as individuals and creating a better world.
We are here to raise awareness and inspire meaningful action by sharing stories, knowledge, and conversations with thought leaders and change makers.
From sustainability to well-being and everything related to conscious living, our mission is to empower you to be the change that you want to see in the world.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Conscious Action Podcast. I am Brian Berneman, your host, and for this episode, I have the pleasure to be joined by Kiran Trace all the way from California in the US. And such a pleasure to be able to have this conversation with you, Kiran. And thank you for taking the time from your schedule to share about your message. And I'm sure that we're going to have a wonderful conversation now. But for those that don't know you, who is Kiran?
Kiran. Who's Kiran? Okay, well, my elevator pitch, as they would say, is that I'm a human development specialist. That means that I have a 15-year clinical practice and background working with various developmental patterns in children and adults that are challenged. So my original practices, I worked with Boys and Girls Club, Parks and Recreation, neighborhood houses, Outward Bounds. I also did a degree in fine arts and ran some theater programs. And all of that is really deeply focused on what are human behavioral patterns and how can we have like normative development when we've had trauma or we've had stress, or we've had various environmental or internal challenges that lead us into slightly, what would we say? Slightly challenged developmental patterns. And that was my background. But 10 years ago, I had a spontaneous and complete awakening into my original nature, it's called. And it was very shattering and changed my life in every possible way. And what happened with my work world is I began to focus on extraordinary development in adults and teens and children, which means looking at human development patterns towards our full purpose and our full capacities to be utilized in all of our unique talents and skills. So I have a clinical practice where I have other master level coaches that I train and teach. And I also have online courses and I have books and lots of fun stuff where I get to work with really cool and exciting people who are working on their own personal development, and I help them move that into extraordinary realms.
Beautiful.
How's that?
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's so nice. And I want to ask you something in terms of that, because I think that it's really interesting how, we move through life in different ways. And as you mentioned, you had your awakening, and I would love to explore a little bit that. But before you move into exploring that, how did you get into the space of behavioral understanding? Were you always interested in how others operate, or was that something that came later in life?
I think it was always, I was hardwired. I came in with it. And I had my own real personal challenges through my childhood and my teens, like everyone else, like some fairly huge dysfunctional problems. And so I had my own developmental challenges. And in my own life, there was like, I think what happens is like, we have, when we're talking about normal developmental patterning, I think many of your listeners might understand this. It's sort of like these milestones in our lives where, like, you know, when we're children, it's like learning to walk, learning to talk, learning to have motor skills and cut with scissors. But as we grew into teenagers, it's things like sexuality and falling in love and being able to hold a healthy relationship. And as we grow into later into our adolescence periods, it's being able to work and have co-workers and working relationships and being able to have goals and dreams for ourselves, and then feeling confident and feeling like we can access the skill set to get those goals and dreams met. But for many of us, mostly because of various trauma levels and stress levels or just innate developmental challenges, it becomes very difficult. There's a big wall between us and the thing we want. And often the thing we want is what we would call normative. It's to fall in love. It's to have healthy relationships. It's to have work that we love. It's to be able to spend money and earn money and save money and give money. It's to have property, or to have, you know, healthy relationships with roommates, or just, you know, these sorts of what we would call normative things. And then we can feel like there's such a wall between us and our dream, and we don't understand a lot of the time that it's actually really possible for us to have the thing we desire. And usually what we're missing is some level of skill set. And that is easy to say and really difficult when we're in it, because we feel so pressed up against a wall that we can't scale. And for most of us, it's a wall that we hit again and again and again and again and again, and we never get past that wall. And at the root of it, I think that, and sort of really where I work today, is about having much less effort in our day-to-day world and being able to move with a kind of an ease and a type of inner peace and a type of personal utilization of our skill set. And so for me, very early on, I was aware that this was a real struggle for everybody. And I began working with neighborhood houses when I was like 13 years old as a volunteer in the programming office. And then I moved into other organizations. And really, by the time I was like 20, I was working with Outward Bound, which is a program for at-risk youth. And it's a pre-prison program. And I was really assisting with various developmental programs, building programs for Outward Bound to help these really challenged youth get some level of self-confidence and self-security and build some relationship skills so that they could actually leave the prison system and work and have much higher levels of functionality in the world. And so, like, at 20 years old, I'm developing programs with Outward Bound to kind of do this, because it's deep fascination for me. And then in my university studies, I studied fine arts, and really I looked at, you know, human behavioral patterns. And I was looking at that through theater, through dance, through visual arts, which is this deep expression of human existence and human emotional patterning. And so it's just like, it's the thing I've always been inside of, you know, and always been in love with and totally fascinated with. And it's, I'd say it's more passionate, you know, I'm more passionate about it today than ever. And I'm at, you know, a good, if we say I started at 13, yeah, so that's like 30 years. Wow. of this work.
That's amazing. Yeah. And you know, I think that it's really interesting, because a lot of times with this topic, and this is something that I work with a lot of my clients, is about understanding what have we been conditioned as well to believe that it's that normal behavior, or what is normal in society. Sometimes it's not what I want to do. I know in my life is not the normal life. Like I've done a lot of things that what I grew up, like people don't do what I've done. People don't just, you know, like leave home and like as soon as they're in the early 20s and go and live in different places and then leaves everything behind and goes to a Tibetan like Buddhist retreat center to live in the middle of the mountains. Like, that's not the normal thing. So I know as well how conditioned a lot of us are in order to do what we believe that is like that enables us to fit in as well, and to be able to belong in this narrative that society a lot of times says this is how we are supposed to be. And all of those things that you were saying, all of those different stages of like, oh yes, and now I'm like making money, now I'm doing this work, now I'm having more money, now I'm like finding a relationship and need to buy a house, and all of those things. And for a lot of people that perhaps that's not what they want to do, that's such an added pressure that it makes them so disconnected from themselves. And I think that from the work that you do as well is trying to connect them back to their true nature, as you were saying before.
I think it's the definition of normal then, right? Like if the definition of normal is an external definition, and that external definition is coming from your family or your community, you can feel very alienated from that definition. Absolutely. If the definition is coming from inside, and there's a recognition inside of what is, we could also define normal as like a basic human capacity, right? So that could be normative as well, the basic human capacities to love, to want peace, to understand ourselves deeper, to have authentic expressions. Like these are normative human basic needs that are the same needs, no matter who we are, where we are, no matter where we are on the gender scale, the age scale, the cultural scale. So it definitely would depend on your definition of what you think of. Like when we think of normative developmental patterns, we tend to define it as internal. But yeah, I think a lot of people in their life get really hammered by an external story of what might be a normative, like what we as a community do, therefore we call this normal, or what we as a family do, therefore we call this normal. And for many of those definitions, they're really isolating. They can be profoundly isolating. They can be the reason that we don't belong. Exactly. Or it can be depending on the culture, some cultures like a Chinese or Japanese, Asian cultures have a lot of deep history of what we would call in the business a type of attachment parenting, which is really cultural attachment, which is to say you're born to fulfill a role in our family. That's what you're there for. And the reason I have this son or the reason I have this child is like to provide for our family, and that we have expectations of who you are, and you grow up feeling like I need to make my family proud and I need to do what my family expects of me. And that's definitely, we see a lot of those cultures that's how that exists, or then we have like opposite cultures. Maybe we have like French and North American and Australian, where it's a lot more free range, and cultures where it's like authenticity and your own rhythm are actually noble and considered valuable in those cultures. So, who's defining normal at that point,
Yes, definitely. And I know this, as you're saying, from the different places that I've lived, what has been normal has been really different. And me acting in one way, like I remember very clearly when I was a kid as well, my family, comparing to other families, my family was really open, and the conversations that we would have in the dinner table, and I started to realize quite early on, that's not how my friends' families actually talk. That's not something normal. Yet for my family, that was completely natural or normalized within my family. And I think that the more that we develop awareness of the fact that there's all of that happening, and as you're saying, come back to this inner guidance instead of that external guidance, I think that it changes a lot in our lives. And I want to ask you, in terms of that, how did your awakening actually perhaps enabled more of that for you, and as well for those that are listening that perhaps don't understand what an awakening is. Can you share a little bit more about how that was for you, what that awakening was, and how did that perhaps enable you to do more of this?
More of this is in developmental work, or more of this in terms of normative behavior? Like more of this is what?
Your own internal guidance system.
Oh, internal guidance.
Yes.
Okay, well, awakening is a very big word, like normal. It can be defined in many, many ways. So lots of people understand things like a personal awakening, and a personal awakening is a beautiful, life-altering experience, which is to say, sometimes if somebody becomes a parent, there's a real awakening that happens where they start to understand love and families and children in a way they never did before, and it deeply alters the entire course of their lives, and deeply alters who they are as a human being. And so we have like personal awakenings, and those are sacred and gorgeous. And I think someone like Oprah Winfrey is a beautiful spokesperson for what personal awakening is. And I think she demonstrated many of her own personal awakenings and generally interviewed people around that. So that's kind of like a personal awakening. Then we can have a spiritual awakening, and a spiritual awakening, similarly life-altering, similarly totally impacts you and changes the course of your world. And what that is a deep recognition that there is something beyond your life, your world, and your identity. So whereas a personal awakening deepens those things, who you are, the relationships that you have, and just kind of, an awakening is kind of like a 180, and it shows you all this stuff that you never knew was there. And in a spiritual awakening, it's to like directly come face to face with the energetic quality of life. And that is beyond the form. And so this can take any number of expressions, but it is to become profoundly affected directly by non-form on many different levels. And then we can have an awakening into original nature, which is altogether a different awakening. And that's an awakening that awakens you out of the idea that there was even a you to begin with, that there's a life to begin with, and connects you it's a direct connection with the all that is, the vast source coming in, the vast emptiness. It is to directly become both aware of that and to the death of any recognition of yourself as this person living this life who has these experiences. So it wakes you out of any kind of personal awakening, but it also wakes you out of any kind of spiritual awakening. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I have a beautiful, really deep sort of field guide article on my blog. I think it's called What is a Spiritual Awakening? And it kind of goes into very deep detail about what each of those awakenings are, some of the pitfalls of them, some of the incredible hallmarks of them. And so there's much more detail if anybody's interested. KiranTrace.com/blog, What is a Spiritual Awakening? And you can do the research on that. But in a nutshell, that's sort of it. And so people like Eckhart Tolle or Byron Katie, a lot of people might know, are examples of people who have had an awakening into original nature. And their teachings are pointing directly to this like vast, spacious emptiness, quite beyond all spirituality and beyond all person and the personality. And so for me, I had a spontaneous awakening similar to both Byron Katie and Eckhart Tolle. It's rare, but it happens. And I was not a spiritually leaning person in any way. I had personal awakenings. I was on a big healing journey, and I had done a lot of, obviously, human development work and personal development work. Quite out of the blue, to me, I feel like my mind just completely blew up, and there was no more mind. Mind was just gone. And for a lot of people, they could hear that and they think, wow, like, lucky you. I freaking wish that my mind would shut off. But it's quite extreme, to say the least. And so it was a very sudden end of, very suddenly recognizing, holy shit, none of this is real. This is all an illusion. And that takes a lot. Took me a good amount of time to integrate. It took me at least 8 years to even just be able to function in the form of this human woman in her life, because I just didn't know how emptiness and source did that, And unlike Eckhart or Byron Katie, who had this beautiful pop out of the whole thing and then stayed out, liked it out there, just stayed out. For me, I'm a young woman. I was a very young woman at the time, and I wanted my life to come back. Like I felt very offside. Like there was tremendous bliss and tremendous awareness, but I wanted to be her. I wanted to be her living a life. And so I really wanted to figure out how Source lives life. And that became a real focus for me. And that became an intense, profound study of human development, right? Like how does Source develop into a human being? Like how is this endless, eternal energy that is all of the universe, like all the energy that all is, how is this coming into form, and specifically the form of a human and in a human life? And so I kind of feel like it's like that final scene of The Matrix, for anybody who remembers that movie, the first Matrix, where he's fighting with the Agent Smith, and there's him in the Matrix, and he's fighting with this agent in the Matrix, and then suddenly he realizes he doesn't have to be in the Matrix, and while he's in the Matrix, he sort of pops out and can see all the code, and then he's witnessing how the code is becoming Smith and Neo. and from that point of view, there's a tremendous amount of insight. So I kind of feel like what the movie showed in 1 minute is like, yeah, I had that. I popped out of the Matrix, and then I was very interested in how the Matrix encodes and what happens. And that took close to a decade to actually figure out.
That's so incredible, and thank you for that reference, because I think that the Matrix, especially the first movie, has so many different teachings that are so relevant for our life and for how society is and how we can actually see that. Like, I know from my own experience, there has been a lot of trying to understand as well this, how do I see myself as this person, Brian, here on this earth, on this third dimension, with the fact that I have as well the experience of that wholeness, or however word we want to call it, and being able to actually understand I'm here for a reason, that, and it's not a fixed reason, but I'm here to experience. And how does this enable me to actually experience the true nature of myself whilst I'm here in this form?
Well, the question is who's the you, right? That's the big question. So this whole thing of I am here in this form, who's the I? If it's a spiritual awakening, it's Brian. If it's an awakening into original nature, it's emptiness.
Yes.
Right? There's nobody here. There's no purpose. There's no experience. There's no nothing. But how does it move? It apparently it is moving. So it's just sort of the reference point is based in where the consciousness is,
Yeah.
So how is Brian, this form, this man, moving from this wholeness place. It's like, it depends on where Brian's consciousness is.
Yes, I remember very vividly my experiences in Tibetan. It's called shunyata, this emptiness or this potentiality space, and how my experience of that was so incredible to understand what you are just trying to, like what you were just saying, trying for me to understand this reference point on this.
Who experienced that? But who experienced that?
Well, it wasn't me. That's the thing. Like I cannot put it into words. My experience, it was so challenging for me to put it into words, how that experience actually was experienced.
Which is to say, if it's coming from Brian, Brian experienced emptiness, right? If it's coming from the vastness itself, vastness experiences Brianing.
Yes.
Right? So it just depends on where your consciousness is. Or for a listener, their consciousness may be, I am listening to Brian and Kiran talk about various experiences that Brian had. You know, like it just depends on where you identify the I, like from.
Yeah.
And who are you? Who are you? And it's just such a beautiful, simple question. And that's like, you know, if it's an experience or a state, then it's coming from Brian.
Yeah, and I would love to know, Kiran, in terms of that you're saying, for someone that, you know, perhaps hasn't had an awakening, regardless of if it's any of the different three that you mentioned, how can they start to experience or to try to develop this sense of experiencing in their life, and to be able to live a life that it's not conditioned in a way that it's not allowing them to express their fullness?
I think one of the beautiful things to know, and that we certainly, I'm sure you do too, focus on, is like, you don't need an experience like an awakening or something in order to be who you are, which is a way to say that who you are, what's listening to my words right now, what's looking out your eyes and looking at the screen or the room that you're in, that is already here. It's already whole. It's already who you've been since you first opened your eyes on the planet. So the first step is to recognize you are already it. Which is, you know, like a dog is a dog. A dog doesn't have to know it's a dog to be a dog, right? A dog doesn't have to experience dogginess to know it to be a dog. Whether the dog knows it's a dog, many of us have had dogs that have been like, my dog's a cat, or my dog's a human, right? Or my dog really thinks that he's, you know, much bigger than he is, right? Like, so your dog's consciousness is not necessarily on being a dog, but it doesn't change the fact that your dog is a dog. And so for ourselves, right, it's like, regardless of where you're focusing or who you would define yourself to be today or who you think you are, it doesn't change the fact of what you are. Like, it doesn't change the fact that looking out your eyes and listening to my voice is awareness. And that awareness has always been here. You have never, ever, ever been without it. Like, you're always aware of something. And so whether you're aware of that or not doesn't change the fact that that's what is. And so that's the first step, is to recognize there's something here that is primarily what you are, that is already it. And it doesn't require an experience. And then the second part of the question is, right, if we find ourselves suffering, right? If we find ourselves in some way, what you might say, not being able to express their whole self, what I might say, challenged to have something they deeply desire or deeply want, that wherever we're suffering will show us what you're calling conditioning, what I would call a core fear. Like, there's fear in our system. And from my point of view, that could be hundreds of lifetimes old. that core fear in your system is a block. It's just a block. It's as simple as that. And we all know so if we go, the simplest thing to begin with, what's listening to my voice, what's looking at your eyes, is already here, been here your whole life. And internally, you have some blocks. Okay. So in order to navigate or move through those blocks, we're going to have to notice the block. And this is a big thing. Most people are trying to avoid that. They just want to put the focus on the thing they want, whether that's an expression of your whole self, whether that's to have the mind turn off, whether that's to fall into deep love, whether that's to have more money, whether that's to raise your children well, whatever that is. We want to focus on that thing instead of looking inside at the actual block and getting to understand the block. And it's really key, because if you opened a door and you wanted to get across the room, and the room was full of walls, and you just kept trying to get across the room, at some point you're gonna have to look at the freaking wall. You're gonna have to look at the wall, and you're gonna have to actually understand the wall. And so there's a really important aspect about being willing and available to notice internally what's going on. And it's very simple, but it's incredibly radical, because we are external focused creatures. We are very, very externally focused. We believe there is a Kiran and a Brian out there. We believe they are separate from ourselves. We believe there is a phone or computer or tablet they were listening this on, right? We have a very solid, secure sense that this exists, even though in grade 5, most of us learned it's all just made of atoms. And those atoms are moving around in space, and there's a whole lot of space. There's more space than atoms. But we didn't have a practical, we're like, I can hold my phone. So how is that made of more space than phone, than material form? And so for that, I'm sort of like, we often are sitting in a movie theater watching a movie, but we don't believe that Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie are in front of us. We don't. We know that there is light projecting those images. But we don't do that in our worlds. Like, we don't sort of like realize it's all just projected images of light, that there's all this space. And it's really revolutionary and amazing to start to recognize that. And also, like, even when we dream at night, we have these dreams at night, and we wake up in the morning and we don't consciously connect that the entire dream came from us. Like, you were in your dream and all this stuff happened, but all of it came from you. It was just a projection. And so it's very difficult for people to recognize that the couch and the tablet and the idea that Kiran and Brett are all projections. And they're projections of these internal fears and blocks. and that's a really beautiful and amazing and actually very simple thing to recognize, because it is. And, what's real and what's true is really simple to discover because it's real and true. And so learning to recognize that your life is a mirror reflection. And very similar to when you look in the mirror and your hair is a mess, you can't go to the mirror and straighten your hair. And so we constantly go to our life and we're trying to straighten it. We're trying to straighten that relationship, or we're trying to straighten that job, or we're trying to meet that person, right? We keep going to the mirror and trying to straighten it out so we can have some peace, instead of coming to ourselves and straightening the hair, and then the reflection is straight. And to recognize that reality is purely a mirror reflection, and the thing it's reflecting is inside of you, is amazing. And the thing that it's reflecting that's inside of you, there's a lot of things inside of you. But the fact that it's reflecting that block of fear, because you're not conscious of how much time you spend captivated by that block of fear. And that block of fear is running as a background program through every little interaction and every little thought and every little dream. And so your consciousness, or let's say subconscious, is very captivated. And so it keeps mirroring and mirroring and mirroring and mirroring. And for someone to stop playing with the mirror because it's going nowhere and come inside and actually notice the block is revolutionary. But how great that there's shows like this and we talk about it. We talk about it now more, because that's the thing that none of us grew up with, your parents being like, hey, reality is a mirror, people, and what's inside is the reflecting surface. So how do you like the reflection? Is it working for you? Because if it's not, you can change it by changing the reflecting surface.
Yes, that's so beautiful. And as you were saying that, I remembered, or the voice of one of my teachers came into my awareness, that we were practicing a lot what you were just saying, going to our blockages, releasing the blockages. And he used to say, he used to tell me, fall in love with going to your blockages. Because when you fall in love with that, you're able to understand that when you work with your blockages, you're going to be able to open the possibility to connect with the truth of who you are, or what you were calling perhaps before the true nature. And he used to say this beautiful way, fundamental openness. That's how he called it. That's what we were trying to achieve when working through releasing the blockages, to be able to find our full potential. He said, your full potential is always stuck in your blockages. All that you need to do is just work on your blockages. That's what he used to say. And I love that, because I know my experience of working through the blockages. And every time there's a new layer of understanding, a new layer of experiencing that comes when working with those blockages. And as you were saying, so many of us have been so out focused or externally focused that we haven't done that work. And it's, as you're saying, very simple, yet very challenging at the same time.
Well, we, in my programs, in my classes, what we do is we try to make it so fun and so delicious and so incredibly juicy that that's what you want to do. You know, so we create these hacks that it's not, so that it's not a challenge. And I think part of it is that we have a lot of modalities in the world, whether it's therapeutic modalities like somatic or transcendental or talking or whatever the hell. And this stuff is very painful, slow, and doesn't create very many results, versus like what you're talking about, where you're like going in and resolving a blockage and then recognizing the mirror changes, right? Like this is a beautiful thing. And to do that, one has to harness the energy of the vast, eternal, all that is. Luckily, it is looking at your eyes and listening to these words, but you have to harness that, not your mind. And so many of our healing modalities actually come from the separate self and the separate mind. And then it becomes effort, looking from effort with effort towards a fear block. And that's like, that's awful. There's what the fuck wants to do that? Like, I don't know, like it's awful. Yeah. But it's really different when you're like in this really beautiful, spacious, delicious energy. And then you're like going to kind of like touch some really deep, intimate part of yourself where it actually feels like sex. It feels like great lovemaking. It's super tantric. Like, who the hell wants to do that? Everybody. Like, let's just spend all day Saturday, like really fucking intimately touching parts of ourselves that have never been touched before with this incredible, juicy, delicious love. And then pop, more love comes. It's like, yeah, now we're talking. Now this is good. You can sign me up for that. I'll do that. So, yeah. So I think in part it's the approach. It's like people think coming internally or inside the body, there's monsters in there. You know, like I've been trying to avoid that shit my whole fucking life. Like there's awful, awful, scary things in there. And they don't understand that there's actually, it's the approach. It's the approach. It's like, how are you approaching this? If you're approaching this from your mind and from fear, everything you do is going to suck. So you might as well just run some distraction, watch some movies, go watch a monster truck relay, or go see a concert, or talk with friends, or drink wine and have oyster bars. Like, sure, like go do that, because who wants to do it? But if you can tap into this profound energy field of total love and joy, and then just kind of like bliss out on that, and then take that and like go like make love to yourself, well, do that.
Yes, and that it's such an interesting thing, because for me, a lot of times I was challenged, and also I challenge now my clients to see that this work that we are doing with ourselves doesn't need to be like hard, and doesn't need to be with effort. It can be, as you're saying, it can be fun, it can be easy, it can be orgasmic,
delicious and orgasmic.
It can be,
in fact, like nothing else can, like I'm sure you've had some really great sex in your life. I've had some really great sex in my life, but that kind of, when you really touch that part of yourself that's never been touched and it's desperate to be seen and witnessed, it's a type of fulfillment that we didn't know was possible, but we're like capable. Like the thing that my students will say to me all the time is, I can heal myself. Oh my fucking God. Like, I didn't know I didn't have to be in this pain. Like it's inside, it's totally inside of my capacity. It's super fun. It's super easy. And I can do this. And I think that it's like, that's the message we need to share. We need to tell, like, P.S. it's really fucking delicious to heal people, and you are totally capable of healing yourself. Just go touch the owie, and it's amazing. Love all over the owie. It's incredible. And there's nothing more that life wants than to evolve. I promise you, it's the most juicy, delicious thing ever. Evolution.
Talking about that, what about these times that we're living in, that what we're talking about is so important?
I think, again, it's your perspective on these times, right? So some people are going to have a perspective that this is like a really challenging, disastrous time. And I do not in any way want to underestimate the immense heartbreak and like catastrophic losses that many of us have suffered. I've had people die, recently in the last month. And, I've had some very catastrophic heartbreak, like these levels of heartbreak that have been happening to people. A lot of people are, their traumas in themselves. And so I don't want to underestimate the impact of the global times we're in, but to just sort of wide pan it out, we have never before in history had such a peaceful world. And that's across so many areas. That's world wars. That is also war, in-country wars. That is domestic violence. That is crime rates. That is, across the board. We've never, the data really has shown again and again and again that we've just never had such a peaceful world. And simultaneously, because of globalization, we've never had so many people so deeply affected by each crime. So every killing, every death, so many people are so profoundly affected by each of them. And so we're in a very interesting time in the world where, although we are at the largest amount of peace this particular planet has had so far, we are also the most conscious, which means sensitive, right? Which means connected, which means we feel the pain extraordinarily so. And just as we were saying, like, every human has a different block inside of themselves. And so how they are navigating this pain is really diverse, really diverse. And so we have some people which we might define as, really on the right side of, and how they're dealing with the pain, and people very on the left side and how they're dealing with the pain, and people in the middle and how they're dealing with the pain. And so, which adds to the cycle, right? Of like, okay, so then how everybody's dealing with the pain is painful to other people, like how you're dealing is triggering, and so it's just a culmination of an immense connectivity. It's an immense sensitivity. And I think for a lot of people, there's a real anxiety, a very real anxiety about the future. And it's very difficult in a place where there's just so much connectivity happening to imagine all could be well, that all could be very well. Mm-hmm. And so our work becomes really important because instead of looking externally in the mirror at the reflection, which is only reflecting those really zingy, painful pieces of you, you could come inside and meet those zingy pieces with this tenderness and this intimacy and love, which actually then gets reflected. And you start to recognize there's another layer to reality in which all is well. And that is a profound thing for any human listening to the show, but I think any human to be able to understand, really deeply understand that very paradox, that we can have catastrophic level of pain and all is well. I mean, that's freedom, people. Like that literally is definition of freedom. That level of paradox can exist. You know, it's like if we defined it in other realms, right? If we said that you could fall madly in love with your soulmate of 100 lifetimes and that person leaves you and you still have love and still all is well. The freedom, right? The incredible freedom, the incredible non-attachment to your true love coming or going. Wow, right? If you're a parent and you adore your child and your child fucks up, like takes a freaking rifle and kills people, and you realize that they are loved, still loved. The freedom that creates for you. If you have, you know, a job, your dream job, you're like, I don't know, freaking celebrity or rock star or something, and then you fall from grace. And then you recognize that all the attention and all the love didn't go anywhere, that all is well. The freedom that brings. And so the opportunity for freedom that is on the plate right now is the biggest, brightest, and juiciest offering there ever has been. There's never been such a juicy offering for freedom.
That's so beautiful. And I think it's such a, as you're saying, such a paradox to be able to look from different perspectives everything that is happening, because I have a similar view of that it's incredibly challenging times, but also it's all about where are we seeing things from, what's the perspective, and how can we see these different perspectives actually happening at the same time, and how do we choose to be with the situation and doing that so that we can heal ourselves. And as we heal ourselves, then we all start to heal because we are all. So then that starts to be reflected out as well. And this is a really interesting space as well on how...
Or the fact that it's already whole.
Yes.
Right? That we could heal ourselves and recognize it's already whole versus it all heals. Do you know, like, we heal ourselves, and the healing of ourselves is a recognition of wholeness that pre-existed. You know, it's the pre-existing wholeness. And that's what we do. We take our brokenness and begin to realize nothing broke. If we really fully alchemize our wound, whatever that block is, to fully alchemize it is to recognize it never broke. It never actually broke. It was an illusion. Yeah. And that's a radical thing. It's a radical thing. And that's the level of freedom that's on offer for everybody today, that level, right? Which in the 70s or 80s was not on offer. You know, it was personal awakening was in the public realm and was in a consciousness, but there wasn't this level of absolute freedom from defining the world through our lens, being able to actually see the world from wholeness is the invitation.
That's so beautiful. And I'm just aware that we're running out of time. But I think that that's such a beautiful thing to be able to leave people with this understanding of that freedom, and how, you know, that is not only a possibility, that is already there.
It's so profoundly inside of your capacity. It is so profoundly inside of your capacity. Like, I remember listening once to an Oprah show, and I think it was Nate, one of her interior design friends, who had survived the tsunami in 2005, I think, in Indonesia, and lost his partner. And I remember Oprah asking, like, how, like many years later, like, how's the healing, or what's the healing? And he's like, yeah, I'm healed, which means, you know, I don't think about it all the time, but it always impacts me still. It's always an impact. And I remember thinking, yeah, because that's people think the definition of healing is eventually I'll move past it. That is not the definition of healing. That is the definition of haven't healed it yet. That's the definition of in the middle of healing. Right? And we can actually make this so much faster. It doesn't have to be years and years and years later. Inside of the same year, you could go, you have the organic capacity to take something that is so catastrophic, so impactful, so devastating and traumatizing, and actually get all the way through, which is the full alchemization. And when it fully alchemizes, the stage of fully alchemized is the recognition that nothing happened, that nothing broke. And that is so crazy a thing if you're standing in your brokenness going, what the hell? But I promise you it's in your capacity, because it's literally who you are, whether your consciousness is there or not. It's who you are. What is listening to my words, what is looking out your eyes, is the very thing that is capable of acknowledging this incredible wellness, this incredible wholeness, this incredible love, and is capable of taking any level of catastrophic or tragedy or stress or pain in your life and proving that to be true.
So beautiful, so beautiful. And for the people that want to get it and more from this, to be able to explore more from this, where can they find you and work with you?
KiranTrace.com. So I'm sure you'll have some show notes. They could just click there. And there are so many tools there. We have a very big blog for those of you that love to read, and my articles are fun and juicy. And there's stuff on parenting and stuff on awakening and stuff on relationship. It's all broken down. And on there is also, we have a pretty big YouTube channel. Feel free to describe. I have these beautiful in-depth conversations. I have lots of guided meditations. There's all kinds of cool, groovy stuff. And once you get in there and get a little bit hooked, we've got some really great courses for you to try. We've got some really low risk 6-day, 7-day, you pick your thing. We got one on purpose. We got one on money. We got one on relationship. We got one on making great decisions. So you can just choose any one of those, and it'll give you just this little deeper dive to just recognize those capacities in yourself. They're all built that way. And then when and if you're ready, which is, I always say, like, slowly drip, take this material and let it drip. And when you're ready, you come into my long form courses, and those move very much like adult university. And there are 3 semesters, and there's 3 very incredible courses. And you come into semesters with a cohort, and that cohort is made up of extraordinary, incredible, evolving humans who have done the work. And the community level is very, very, very strong. And so we have this beautiful international global community of cool people that are very connected in those classes. And many people do those classes. Well, some people, we just started class this week, and for some people it's their 8th year. Some people it's their 1st year, some people it's their 3rd year, but it's a really deep dive into your true human capacity, and that's worth checking out too. But start slowly in some of the smaller tools and see if you can get inspired there. That's what I would think.
Thank you so much for your time and for such a wonderful conversation, such a juicy conversation, which I hope that for everyone listening, something resonated and something sparked on this conversation, and that you can take something away from this beautiful conversation. So thank you so much for taking the time to share with all of us, and hopefully we can have more conversations like this.
Sure, it's great. Thanks, Brian. I'm so glad you do this podcast. Keep spreading the news. It's so important and useful these days. So thank you for inviting me, and it's lovely to be your guest.
Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.
What did you like the most about this episode? Take a moment to think about what change you can make in your life today.
Share your conscious action on social media using #ConsciousAction and tagging @ConsciousActionNZ so we can celebrate your impact on the world and create a ripple effect.
One easy action we would love for you to take right now is to share, like, and subscribe to this podcast. This will help us get these messages out into the world and inspire more people to take conscious action in their own lives, contributing to the better world we hope for.